If they don't charge commission, how do these platforms make money?
That's a $1 million question. Most of these models globally would end up at 4 to 5% of GMV. But at the same time, their underlying costs are very different. They will never be insanely profitable in percentage terms, but they'll be profitable models.
What kind of scale would you need to create a large company with a large amount of profit if you are only making 3 to 4% out of a transaction?
If you want to make $10 million of profit, you need 50 times that on the GMV side. There are going to be fewer markets where this works. So clearly e-commerce, it has been proven, ride sharing, it has been proven.
If the addressable opportunity is large enough and my cost base is small, then I can make money even with significantly lower margins. Where are the new opportunities for zero commission models? One of the things that has been keeping me up at night are zero commission models. I don't know if you noticed, but recently Uber announced that they are no longer going to charge commissions for auto rides. Instead, they are moving to a subscription model for the auto drivers. I also learned recently that Rapido has grown 3 times the size of Ola in terms of rides in its business. Meesho in the last few months has announced profitability and has been profitable on a sustained basis. What is common between all these 3 examples is the fact that none of these companies charge commissions to the suppliers to complete transactions on the platform. They all work in what are called zero commission models, where they charge for other things except for and not for closing the transaction. To discuss this in detail today, I have my colleague and partner Rahul Chowdhri, who's a resident expert in all things e-commerce and consumer. So welcome, Rahul.
Thank you.
So Rahul, to get started, let's talk about what are zero commission models. And if you can share some examples to point out the difference, that will be great.
So very simply put, zero commission models, you can think of them like true marketplaces, where they connect suppliers to the demand side consumers. They have very basic promises that the platform offers. So think of it like a low cost airline like Indigo, saying that my promise is clean aircraft, I'll get you from point A to point B in time. That's it. Similarly, if you think of Rapido, their promise is if you book a cab, it will come, it will take you from point A to point B. For Meesho, it is about I'll give you humongous supply. And then most of the other services that the consumer may or may not want are unbundled. And it's a choice of consumer and supplier to say whether supplier offers it and whether consumer is willing to pay for it. So in that sense, as I said, it is a democratized marketplace in the truest of its sense and leaves most of the knobs in hands of either the supplier or the consumer.
Got it. So if they don't charge commission, how do these platforms make money?
That's a $1 million question. So clearly, see, every business to run, they have to make money. What zero commission model, if I can say so, what they have said is instead of charging commission for every order, I'll figure out some other ways to make money. In e-commerce, the most standard way is on the advertising piece, where a supplier has to pay to come up in the paid listing, just like you do on Google. There's an SEM component. So in some sense, e-commerce platform is where you have to advertise to come up. In some other cases like Rapido, they charge a monthly fees. Some people will also charge for the service. So like if Meesho is offering logistics to the supplier and the supplier wants to use Meesho logistics, they'll pay. And because Meesho is operating at a much larger volume, they can make some cut out there. There could be payment as a service. There could be overtime lending as a service to some of the suppliers. So there are multiple other ways to make money. But in e-commerce, the most dominant, and Taobao is the example globally, where most of the revenue let's say if you're making 4 to 5% of the GMV as your overall revenue, more than half or maybe 60 to 75% comes from advertising.
But if you're charging the same amount of money, extracting the same amount of money from the transaction, how does it matter whether you call it commission or advertising or service fees? In the end, on the aggregate, if aren't you charging the same amount of money from the same person?
So actually, as a percentage of transactions, you charge much lesser. And which is the interesting thing about zero commission is that most of these models globally would end up at 4 to 5% of GMV is what they end up charging. But at the same time, their underlying costs are very different. So most of these platforms will not do a lot of marketing or incentives, which is what, so if let's say Uber earns 30% commission, 20% is passed back to the customer or to the supplier in terms of incentive. So what they are left with is 10%, whereas these models are left with 4-5%. So the difference is not 30 versus 5, it is 10 versus 5. And then within that, there are several costs that they don't built in from day one. So like Rapido will not have a pricing team internally to figure out they leave it to the supplier to figure out pricing. They will not have incentive team to say which rider to move up, which rider to move down. A Meesho will not have fixed cost of fulfillment centers. And then, so those are the costs that get taken out. So that makes the model more fungible. Despite ups and downs in the business, they can say, I don't have to carry this fixed cost. And then there are some obvious costs they don't even have from day one. So there is no data science team or a big data science team to figure out as a pricing in an area at this point of time for a travel, for a ride that I want. So that is how at least you would see that they make 4 to 5% at a revenue level, but they still end up making 2% at a company level. So they will never be insanely profitable in percentage terms, but they'll be profitable models. And the hope is that the scale is much larger so that your absolute profit still kind of compensates from what a full stack model will end up making.
There's a lot to unbundle there. I mean, my most important takeaway was that data scientists are expensive and a major cost item for any startup. But what kind of scale would you need to create a large company with a large amount of profit if you are only making 3 to 4% out of a transaction?
True.
And does that kind of scale exist in a country like India?
So yeah, you are right that in the sense that this model need not work in all markets, in all sectors, if I can say. So they will work where the TAM is very large. Because again, coming back to let's say 2%, right? If you want to make $10 million of profit, you need 50 times that on the GMV side. So for every 10 million, that is the profit for the 2% of profit or 10 million of profit, that's the kind of GMV you need. So there are going to be fewer markets where this works. So clearly e-commerce, it has been proven, ride sharing, it has been proven. And then there are a few other markets, maybe we can together figure out where else can it work. But these are two obvious ones which are large markets where it has worked.
Does this unbundling fundamentally create a more scalable business? Like you mentioned, Meesho doesn't need to operate fulfillment centers. Does that make, or Meesho doesn't need to do logistics, whereas a Flipkart needs to do some logistics. Rapido doesn't need to figure out pricing, and Ola does have to figure out pricing. Does getting out of operations make these businesses fundamentally more scalable than businesses that are in the commission model?
So that's a very good point and very good insight. And let's figure out why they even like full stack model. Why did they need to have those services in-house? See, part of that is most of these models when they started, like a Flipkart or an Amazon, the online commerce market didn't exist. So they had to create that market in some sense. And for that, they had to provide a lot of trust to the consumer in terms of, if you get a wrong item, I'll take, it's no question asked returned. I will make sure stuff comes to you in 2 days or 1 day versus the prior models before Flipkart and Amazon will take 7 days. You don't even know whether that item will arrive or not. Logistics services didn't exist. So clearly they had to build a lot of it in-house. Today why they still need it is because of the promise they have to the consumer. And if you don't make those promises, if you are saying I only make sure I give you enough supply, and yes, item might reach you in 3 days, it might reach you in 10 days. Customer doesn't care about that fact. In which case the platform itself becomes inherently more scalable, as you said, because to grow from $1 billion to 2 billion, you don't need from 10 warehouses to 20 warehouses, because those are all cost built in, those are all execution level challenges. You need to raise money to be able to do that. Good part is because those services now available from third party, you can, as you rightly said, build a more scalable business and grow much faster than what a full stack model will end up growing.
What is interesting is that these are fundamentally all software businesses, and they were forced to become operating businesses or forced to become retail businesses because nobody else was there to do all the other hard parts of the job. The question though is whether they can earn software kind of margins, and does does the margin even need to be calculated as a percentage of GMV? Is that even the right metric? Or is the margin simply the markup that you get on the cost of building the software, like in any software company? So it makes you think whether commission-based businesses were real software businesses in the first place. But we'll park that to a different time. I do want to go back to your analogy of this being an Indigo or even more starkly a Ryanair of e-commerce, where what you get for the base price is an extreme no-frill service. You stand in the aisles and go on the flight. But if you want a seat, you pay extra. If you want a window seat, you pay extra. If you want carry-on baggage, you pay extra, and so on. And I wanted to ask you if you see this as a form of price discrimination, if you see this as a form of letting in highly price conscious, highly value conscious users into the e-commerce umbrella, and letting them choose whether they are okay with an absolute no frills experience as long as they get the item for a cheaper rate.
No, fair point. And if you see like empirically from past, this model does work for people who care about price. But at the same time, I think that customer contract is not about price. Customer contract is about that basic service you're providing. But it does appeal more to people who are price conscious. And you rightly said that in an airlines, if all I care about is going from A to B, and I don't carry any luggage with me in general, then why should I pay for all other passengers who might have a check-in luggage? Well, that's what ends up happening, right? Everybody is assumed to carry a 15 kg of luggage. Half of us don't, but we still pay for the other half. So that's the other challenge with full stack models, that some people are paying more for somebody else. Even on the supply side, right? Suppliers who don't do well or who are not good suppliers, because of them, good suppliers also end up paying, because now returns are a common thing for all suppliers on that category. So you do end up, in some sense transferring cost from one guy to the whole group, just because one group is not acting the way it should. And hence, I would say price is what you end up seeing, and it works very well in a heterogeneous market. In a very homogeneous market, it will be harder for some of these models to work. But like in India, in Southeast Asia, in China, where the society is heterogeneous, there are some people who want same day delivery, no question asked return, and all kind of customer service. Whereas there are certain set of people who don't care. As in, for them, price is what matters. Yes, in 2 out of 10 times, they will not get the exact service they were promised, they will not get the exact item. But they are okay to, be with that experience for the overall pricing or the selection that they're getting from that platform.
I agree. Next time I'm going to demand a refund from the airline for all the people who stand at the check-in counter who did not do their web check-ins, because that's an extra cost that I'm bearing on their behalf. I do also want to check from you the incentive alignment between the platform and the supplier. In a commission-based platform, the platform success depends on the supplier's success. The platform only makes money when the supplier makes money. However, when you're unbundling the services entirely, then the platform's fee is divorced from the success of the supplier. The transaction need not even happen for me to make money. Take the Uber example with the auto. Once Uber has onboarded the customer, Uber's incentives to offer a ride to that particular auto driver reduce, because they are getting the same monthly fee anyway. So how do you ensure an alignment of incentive when you are no longer at a transaction-based commission?
Point is very valid. I would differentiate between the revenue model versus what the platform forces the supplier and consumers to do. So just because you are not charging per commission doesn't mean Uber and Rapido doesn't care about whether the ride happened or not. So they will still want that ride to happen. They will still collect feedback. Yes, in case of ride sharing, nobody cares about ratings when you're booking the next ride. Most of the time we don't look for it. Whereas in case of Meesho, you will look for the rating next time when you're buying from that same supplier or somebody else is buying from that supplier. But that is something that the platform makes sure that if their basic promise to the customer is if they book a ride, it will come and it will take you to from point A to point B. Then if that is not getting fulfilled, they will have to build mechanisms to get that supplier off the platform. In fact, I will make another argument. It's not as the full stack service platforms are very democratic for suppliers or they are aligned. A lot of time they surface suppliers who will do more business for them versus maybe a better supplier who will fulfill the customer better, or a good quality supplier who will fulfill the customer better. Because their business is all about getting more commission, and if they can get more commission from the same guy, it's better for them in the back end, so they will start surfacing those search results up, or incentivizing those suppliers in some other way at a volume level and so on. Whereas at least zero commission model doesn't have that incentive alignment challenge, that they are saying, you have paid me a fixed fee. If you put money on advertising, I'll bring you up, but that's it. Beyond that, I make sure that customer service is also fulfilled or customer promise is also fulfilled.
Isn't it exactly the other way around? That when my incentives are aligned, I help the customer, I'm optimizing for customer conversion because that's when I make money. And so the best suppliers will actually rise to the top because those are the ones that the customers are choosing. Either the customers are rating higher or the probability of conversion is higher with the best suppliers. With zero commission models, I might surface the ones who have paid me the most because they are paying for advertising, let's say. So is there a danger of concentrating demand in the hands of the suppliers with the deepest pockets if a large company is a supplier in my business, they can afford to spend on advertising. They get most of the demand, and the small guy who might be really good at fulfilling the service doesn't actually get demand because he doesn't have the upfront capital to pay for advertising.
No, fair point. And I would go back to Google as an example. They have SEM and SEO both, right? So if they just show SEM results, people will move out of that platform. As in, they will say my search queries are not getting fulfilled just because people who can market are the ones I'm seeing. So they try to maintain a healthy balance of 3 people who will paid and 5 people who have not paid and show the results and let consumers choose. So think of it very similar on Meesho, that if they start fulfilling the whole search result page with just paid suppliers or people who are advertising, I don't think consumers will like it and they will move out. So they have to keep that balance. And even within the paid ones, they will still show the ratings of those suppliers. So it is paid, it is coming up. You also know the rating. Now as a consumer, you can choose, you click the paid one or you buy from the one who is not paid, but is coming up because the relevancy of search result mattered, or ratings is what mattered, or pricing is what mattered. So then you make a choice. At that point of time, Meesho is not making a choice who will come up. In a full stack model, there's always a risk that people who give you more margin to the platform might come up versus people who are the best suited to service the consumer. So that's how I will differentiate. You can't have just people who advertise be the only search results on your homepage or the first page of that query.
No, I have a fundamental mistrust of models where you depend on the goodness of the heart of the platform. And to some extent, this algorithm of what comes up first, if it is dependent not on where your economic incentives lie, but on the goodness of your heart, that I want to service the customer, that is why I will surface the best suppliers as opposed to the suppliers who spend most on advertising. I think at some point when you're having a bad quarter as a platform, you might start compromising on those principles, whereas economic principles almost never lie. Anyway, let's explore one more aspect of this unbundling of services, which is that the customer at the end doesn't care about who is doing the fulfillment, who is doing the logistics, who's doing the payment, who's doing the customer support, and so on. Isn't there a brand that needs to be responsible fully for end-to-end delivery? Not only that the product was a good quality product, but that it was delivered on time, returns are taken care of, and customer service is provided, the refund gets credited on time. So who builds that layer of trust if every service is unbundled, if there's a different provider providing all these aspects?
Yeah, so see, one is that, again, different consumers have different expectation from some of these platforms. So if our expectation is that I want this end-to-end promise and it should happen every time, then I don't think these platforms are a good answer. What these platforms try to do is, as I said, basic service, but on top of that, if they say logistics, they will say 4 to 14 days. Now, if you deliver that item in 20 days, then clearly you have not been able to get a good sense of potential logistics partners and so on. And hence, it's a question of what you promise. For some consumers, it matters, for some it does not, and that is what they try to, in some sense, segment and target that set of consumers. For it does not absolutely matters. It's also a question of pricing. When you're basically, and in some sense, when you're buying a 400 rupee kurti, you know what you're getting. You're not buying a 1,000 rupee kurti. Similarly, it also works, like this model generally works in where the suppliers are fragmented and, if I can call them, commoditized. So take an example of a Rapido or an Uber. We can call it whatever, sedan and go and that all. Finally, it's that same Indica that arrives or a Swift Desire. It is as dirty as it is on all three platforms. So for consumer now, they are asking, as long as if I'm getting the same ride, same driver, but I'm getting cheaper, and this platform is cheaper because supplier is now passing on a lot of commission they would have given to the platform directly to the consumer. So why would I go to a more expensive platform? Right? So for you care about is car came, it was Swift Desire or Indica, it came on time, it made me go from point A to point B. I can't make the driver talk less or switch on the AC. So it doesn't matter now which platform I'm on. So that is what consumers are saying, what is the value I'm getting? And that's what I'm paying for. And as long as that promise is clear, it works. And yes, it doesn't work for everybody.
Maybe I can share a personal counter example. So driven by almost the same base desires, I decided to take an airport cab one day as opposed to an Ola or Uber. And I was feeling quite chuffed with myself. I've saved 200 rupees on this ride. It's the same kind of cab. Yes, it was a crappy cab on Uber, and it's going to be a crappy cab on airport taxi as well. Till the guy decided to take the long route, the back route, because he would save on tolls. And I realized that unlike in an Uber or an Ola, there was no recourse. There is nothing I can do to complain about this driver because there is no platform involved. I'm doing a direct transaction with the supplier, and this was a supplier that I could not trust. I made the same mistake across multiple categories. I made the same mistake in Airbnb as well. I inquired about an Airbnb property in India, and the supplier, the owner, sent me a message on the side saying, "I'll give you a 15% discount if you come directly to me." I did that, and then when things started to go wrong during the stay, there was no customer support. There was nobody to complain to. So I guess the question is that supply really commodity at all? Or that whole commodity supply is a myth, and that a platform, at least in a country like India, which is extremely low trust, that the end supplier knows that he's never going to do business with you ever again, and has an incentive to do bad behavior when there is no platform in the middle orchestrating the entire transaction.
No, that is a fair point, and actually in my mind, think of zero commission as something in between. You are not dealing only with the supplier. There is a recourse, but the recourse is limited. And you may not get to talk to a person on customer support, but you will be able to chat with the person. And you'll not come back to that same driver. You never know, but the platform makes sure that next time the driver is not surfaced up or down if they don't meet a certain minimum bar. Now, they will not move him totally out of the platform unless there are like 5 complaints. So they have all those mechanisms. But what I meant by commoditized supply was that you can't differentiate between what one platform provides or a full stack platform provides versus a zero commission platform provides. If I'm getting the same supply, if it's the same kurti I'm getting on Amazon and Meesho, why would I pay more on Amazon? It's a 400 rupee kurti, it's a 350 rupee kurti here. I would rather buy from here if it's the same kind of expectation in terms of quality.
I'm quite looking forward to seeing you in a kurti. So next podcast we will do with kurtis. But I do want to double click on this differentiated supply versus commodity supply. I get your point that the product is identical, and if the customer is willing to compromise on the experience, then they can go with the zero commission model because it is cheaper. But in cases where the quality of the supplier actually makes a difference, where the quality is actually not a commodity, can zero commission model still work? Or where the customer has no ability to differentiate between a good supplier and a bad supplier. Take doctors, for example. A patient has no way to know who's a good doctor and who's not a good doctor. In that kind of a business, do you necessarily need a platform to ensure quality?
Very interesting point. So the way I would think of it is there any way or any marker on quality or who's a good or a bad supplier? Like your example of doctor is very, very hard. Maybe it is hard to make a zero commission model in that case, because even customer reviews may not be a reliable marker, because it's finally the outcome that matters. Sometimes it takes time to get that outcome. People don't come back and give a review again. It's a lower frequency use case for most people. Maybe in 4 times a year is what you will go and visit a doctor. So for all those reasons, it becomes harder, one, to assess the quality, and second is get any feedback loop going on that quality, versus where the frequency is higher and there are some very obvious markers. Did the color of my item fade? Did the person take a wrong route? Those are much clearer outcomes that you can then create a feedback loop to say whether this supplier should be there on the platform or not. So maybe that's a way to think of it. I had not thought of it, but that's an interesting approach where you can't figure out a way to qualify a supplier. There you do need a middle layer or a platform that guarantees those services versus the supplier saying, I'll do it for you.
Is it also dependent on the level of experience in the product? That there could be straightforward goods, but if you're, let's say, aggregating a marketplace of travel experiences, where experience is a far more important aspect than just the quality of the goods. In that case, what could be the markers of quality in a zero commission model?
So there's a very interesting point. If you think of Airbnb, what do you book based on? I read through a lot of reviews. So if customer is very involved in that experience, they do leave detailed feedback when they're very happy or very unhappy. And that could be a way of figuring out, whether I should book this Airbnb or not. There are few people who will take early chances. So a lot of times you see hotels and houses which are never rated, but they'll typically start with a much lower price to get, and they are more incentivized to give good experience most of the time. So they'll give you better price. In that sense, if you are that early risk taker, you will go and stay there and you grade them very back. But that customer feedback loop becomes a very important part in those kind of cases. And most likely those experiences are involved experience, so consumer is also willing to come back and write detailed feedback. If you don't have that, then the challenge will be there. That next time I have to book, what do I rely on?
Very interesting. So to all the entrepreneurs out there, one low-hanging fruit is a zero commission Airbnb. I'll take royalty on that business idea. Let's go back to how these platforms make money, both for the platform and for the supplier. The supplier is it's relatively clear, but how does a platform actually make even the 4% kind of margins that we were speaking of? Are there enough extra services to sell for them to make this kind of margin?
So different sectors will have different business models on what allows you to make money. In e-commerce, as we were earlier discussing, advertising is the most dominant theme, followed by logistics. And those then become hybrid cases. And while we are discussing full stack on one side, zero commission on one side, I don't think there is any pure model. Both have some flavors. The question is where you started from. So even in Meesho, you'll have verified supplier, right? So there might be a fees they charge. You might also provide them procurement help, like Zomato has done with the fresh supply service business they have for restaurants. So you can think of creating a supply pool for those your suppliers, if they are traders, for example. You can do lending in case of rideshare and both commerce. So different sectors in rideshare, subscription is the most dominant theme that we have seen. Uh, but those different sectors with their own ways to figure out the revenue model. All I'm sharing are more the dominant ones that we have seen in different, or at least in these two models globally.
No, it goes back to my newfound belief that startups either die or end up becoming B2B SaaS companies. I think I would like to update it to say that startups either die or end up becoming B2B SaaS or lending companies, because these are the two largest profit pools for software companies. Anyway, but I do have a point question on advertising. See, if you look at what Google did for advertising, is that it made advertising performance-based. Even today, it's called performance marketing for the reason that you as an advertiser only pay when you get value out of it. Doesn't a platform charging for advertising compared to transactions actually make it less performance-based? That if you were used to paying per transaction, from there you're moving to a cost per action model, or a cost per lead model, or God forbid, a cost per impression model. How can that be more efficient than a cost per transaction model for advertising?
I don't mean to imply that the model is more efficient, just to be clear, right? What these models say is that you can advertise if you are, and think of it like Google product ads, right? If consumers don't click on it, that model never works. There is a reason why that model works, is because a lot of consumers click on it and find value in the end. Even as an advertiser of a brand, let's say I'm a consumer brand and I am using Google and I'm using the PLA, if I don't see impact or let's say conversion over a period of time, I'll stop doing it. And if consumers don't find the value, they'll start clicking on it. So that model kind of self-corrects itself. And as we were earlier discussing, you as a platform can't show only people who are doing performance. You have to show other suppliers and differentiate for the consumer that these are people who are paid, these are people who are free. Now you choose. You might like an image of somebody who's made up, advertisement on the top. You click on it. You may not like the rating. You come back and then go to the organic search, or you may like the rating and then buy from it. But if you don't like the product, you will come back and rate it negatively. And in that sense, it will self-correct is what I would say. That advertiser will say next time, I'm not getting the returns that I wanted. So it is inefficient, but I think it self-corrects itself over a period of time.
Actually, I'm reminded of my favorite business model in India, which is matrimony. This is more than a decade ago. I was speaking to the CEO of an online matrimony company, and I asked him what percentage of their users were paid versus free. And that paid number, I don't remember it precisely, but the paid number was tiny, low single digits. And I asked him, how do you ever make money in this business? And then he told me his secret sauce. You made money by making the core platform so inefficient that your customer will pay you for additional efficiency. So the biggest problem in online matrimony is spam. And so instead of making that efficient by better matching, he says we upsell a service that helps you reduce spam. So there will be a human being who will sift through all the profile matches and send you the three that are most relevant. They could do it with an algorithm, but then they could not monetize it. So, it is possible that all the services for suppliers, whether it is better results on your advertising, whether it is better supply to the suppliers, could be a way of increasing efficiency in very obvious ways that gets you.
See, but also think of it other way, Ritesh, that if I'm a new supplier, how do I come up? How do I ever get discovered? If advertising didn't exist, right? Because I will never come up in the ranks. People have more ratings, more sell-through rates, everything they have history, right? So advertisement in some sense also allows new set of suppliers to bubble up in the platform and at least get their business going. So it is not just one way that only the more dominant ones will keep on advertising. Market is efficient in that sense that somebody else who's more hungry and believe that they have a better product will pay slightly more on an incremental basis, or for that person it's a zero business they're starting with. For them to advertise for 10 next orders is, they are okay paying slightly more than somebody who's doing 10,000 orders on the system.
Actually, that's a very insightful point, Rahul. This solves what I call the App Store problem. That the top apps on the App Store end up remaining in that list of top 10 apps because they are most discoverable.
True.
And so, for a new app in a category to come up, if there were no way to pay to be in the top 10 for a little while, they would never get discovered. It's a very interesting point. I also do want to talk about the cost angle for the cost for the supplier versus the cost for the platform. Is the supplier's cost of doing business fundamentally lower in India? And do they, by definition, create a more efficient cost base compared to the platform doing that part?
A very interesting point, and I agree in the sense that the more power you give to the supplier to figure out pricing, their own cost, how much are they making, it is much more efficient in India. If I'm a shop owner, I never count my own salary as the cost of doing business. If I am a ride driver, I don't think of it that if it's not that I've employed somebody else, I'm myself doing that business, right? So their mindset is very different. Their way of doing business is different. Sometimes they will cut corners to, let's say, repair the car or not repair it and let it be dirty and whatever. But they're okay, as in they understand their business. They know how to make money. Whereas a corporate setup will have different kind of cost. I was recently talking to one of the ride sharing founders, and the kind of people they have, they never hire from tier 1 colleges. The senior leaders are groomed over last 6 to 7 years to become what people might have started a very entry-level job have become senior leaders now. Whereas if I'm launching a full stack platform, I have to provide an amazing service, then I build up those costs on day one.
Yeah, no, one of our portfolio founders calls it doing business in English. And that doing business in English is expensive in India. And so I guess your point is then that the lower cost of doing business for the supplier, because they are a small business, makes the entire network more efficient. And it's not transfer of commission from one to the other. It is actually a more efficient way of doing the business in the first place. Got it. I would like to touch upon another aspect, which is are zero commission models a way to expand the total addressable market in India? One of the frequent challenges leveled against Indian startups is that they are trying to provide first world levels of service at third world prices. And by reducing the level of service, by reducing by unbundling services from the core product, are these startups, are these platforms then increasing the TAM of their users?
No, very true. I was actually going to come to that point. Think of it again, airlines, when the prices for a ticket was 15,000 rupees to 5,000 rupee. And it has to be massive price difference. It can't be incremental price difference. But you make that change and suddenly a lot more people are willing to take a flight versus taking a train. So very similar, and especially where at least one segment of the market is already showing a behavior of using that service, then percolating it to the maybe more price sensitive customer. You reduce the price dramatically and suddenly the market expands. And if I could, take a ride from point A to point B at a much lower cost, I will not maybe take out my car. And this is somebody I'm talking about who owns a car. If I own a two-wheeler and I have 4 people who I need to, from a family who need to go from point A to point B, if price is attractive, I'll definitely take that versus going in a bus.
And I guess then what you're also saying is that if the market is, if the addressable opportunity is large enough and my cost base is small, then I can make money even with significantly lower margins.
Yeah. In fact, I'm slightly tangential, but you might recall, Ritesh, when you invested in Taxi for Sure, the notion of TAM was how many taxis are there. But you provide that service and suddenly the number of supply humongously jumped, I think 10x or something.
Yes. No, in fact, it is my core belief, Rahul, that demand creates its own supply. That at least Indian businesses are very, very responsive to changes in demand. And to your point, I had actually believed that the entire market for taxi services, online taxi services in India was about 250 million. Right? We are talking about each of these providers doing billions of dollars of GMV today, and that is just over 10 years from when the industry first started. So I agree that demand creates its own supply. If there is demand for online commerce at a certain price point, and the suppliers are able to procure at that price point, the supply will get created. Fantastic. Last question from my side. Where are the new opportunities for zero commission models, apart from zero commission Airbnb that we've already concluded is a great idea?
Yeah.
Where would you?
Look, first of all, I would say hopefully founders will tell us some of these answers. On myself, like, the one obvious one is food delivery, where there are market is large, two large players, both operating on high commission. One can sense that there are set of suppliers who are not happy paying those commissions. Some of them don't even go through delivery through this platform, the large ones. Small ones are not happy. So if one can think of that as a market and disrupt it, hopefully ONDC can help out there, though there are still some question marks. We talked about Airbnb, but hotels in general, right? As in, it's a very fragmented market, very hard to, you do rely a lot on the platform, but can there be a set of customers who are okay relying on ratings more than anything else? Even urban company equivalent as in the home services market, possible. So at least those 2-3 ones that I can think of. But as I said, most of the time I find founders give better answers to some of these. But I don't know if you have a view on where else.
No, travel actually I agree with, because even today the demonstrated behavior on travel is particular for both airlines and hotels. You actually do not hold the OTA accountable. If I have a poor experience at the hotel, I hold the hotel accountable. If I have a poor experience in a taxi, I hold Uber accountable.
Yeah,
so
true.
I think there's an existing behavior of relying more on the supply than on the platform in travel. And so travel is to me an obvious opportunity. I'm a little less convinced about food delivery because imagine a scenario where for express delivery you have to pay more, and then the supplier doesn't do a good enough job of that express delivery because logistics is not their core competence. Then who do you go to complain to?
Actually, in that case, maybe logistics need to be core part of that platform. As in, what is the promise end of the day, right? That I will get you food on time. And if that means I have to get food you in 30 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever it is, then maybe I need to own that is the core part of the platform. Right? So it's a question of what is the promise to the consumer in that case. And you do charge for shipping, but you don't. But again, maybe the restaurants come on subscription basis. So they all see, even if for them to deliver food, if they were not doing via Chotu, if they really needed to deliver like 30% of the business online, they will have to hire those people. Right? Somebody has to hire them, somebody is paying for that cost. So you do bake that into the platform, but most of the other stuff you don't care about. Is one way to do it. I'm just
definitely for larger restaurants, I think it is certainly an opportunity. And I would be surprised if Zomato and Swiggy don't actually break it down for at least the larger restaurants.
They have different commissions for different kind of restaurants.
Absolutely. But for smaller restaurants, how do you inspire trust is the key question that I think is still unsolved. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rahul, for your insights. I think it's been a stimulating discussion.
Same here.